Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And today we're talking about this and that, which is another way of saying that I'm still recovering from Lustration Weekend, and I'm just going to talk about whatever today. And this, of course, is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. If you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you'll know that you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on. They'll appear here in my chat room, and we can talk directly. Um, as you know, last week and last weekend, we were covering the Corellian lustration. And if you were watching that, you saw a little bit more of beautiful Danville. The double investiture was held at Ellsworth Park on the banks of the Vermilion River here in Danville. And, having grown up here, the beauty of the local terrain was not necessarily as strong in my mind as it is having gone away and come back. I think the river is absolutely beautiful. I think the ceremony certainly was beautiful. Um, but, this is a very lush area for growth. Um, and a beautiful river. And so, again, if you were watching this last weekend, you will have seen more of that. You'll certainly see more of Danville in coming weeks. As you may know, I am involved in opening Gaia Thrift, who will have its actual opening on my birthday, June 11th, and we'll certainly be doing things for that. And we'll be talking about not only Gaia Thrift, but why this is important to ecology, why this is more than just an obvious venture, why it's also a spiritual venture. And we'll be talking more about that in coming weeks. And hello to Janet in the chat room. It's good to see you, Janet. So I was asking myself, what am I going to talk about today? Yesterday we talked about the new book, Reverend Don's Book of Numerology. And I'm very gratified that we've had several people order copies already. And if you would like to pre-order your copy, you can do that at Corellian Publishing. And I'll talk a little bit about that for a moment. And the Book of Numerology is an examination of numerology, both historically and in terms of practice, how to do it, what it is, and the things that it connects to. And in my mind, my first book on the subject of numerology was a tiny little book that I found in a supermarket, no larger than this. And it actually contained all of the basics of numerology. Um, However, far larger books can and have been written on the subject. But in my mind, part of what is worth talking about with numerology is not only numerology itself, but everything else that it connects to. And hello to Zane in the chat room. It's good to see you, Zane. Numerology, like everything in metaphysics, is the center of a vast system of correspondences. I was talking yesterday about how the design for the numerology cards drew upon planetary correspondences, among other things. And this is all very fascinating in my mind, and part of what I want to explore through that book. I try to do that whenever possible with the different things that I write. Sometimes I because of the size of the subject, I cannot get into all of the minutiae I might like to get into. But I'm a great believer. I'm a great believer in little side stories. To be honest, I love all of the things that connect to one another. If you've read my writings on the subject of palmistry, you'll know that I had to put in the story of the Empress Eugenie of France, and how, as a child, her future was read for her by a palmist who supposedly correctly predicted that she would become a queen and live for 100 years, both of which she more or less did. She was not quite 100, but she was well over 90 when she died, and lived long enough to become the Empress of France, lose the empire, and lived to see everything change again with the First World War. Quite a remarkable life, but it has that tie into palmistry. Um, some of the famous legends that connect to some of these different arts, I think, are as interesting in themselves um, as anything else you're going to talk about. When I wrote about numerology for the second degree materials, I talked about how Socrates, the great Greek philosopher, had consulted, well, actually, physiognomy in second degree, but how he had consulted a physiognomist to do a physiognomy reading of him. And the physiognomist came back very embarrassed and said, "Well, I hate to tell you, but your physiognomy is basically that of an idiot." Not quite in those terms, but it was not at all complimentary. And the philosopher looked at him and said, "Yes, you're absolutely right. That's exactly how I was before I studied philosophy." And he used this as an example of how you can improve yourself through spiritual study. And hello to Vivian P in the chat room. It's good to see you, Vivian. Um, these little things out of history can be very instructive. If we look at the story I was just telling about Socrates and the physiognomy, what it says is that you are not just what you're born, that all of these different systems of spirituality and divination are there for you to use to improve yourself. That if you have certain character flaws you're born with, there are ways to heal and deal with those. If you have fears and phobias, there are ways to work with those. If you have limitations, there are ways to come to terms with those. And hello to Nikki in the chat room. It's good to see you, Nikki. And this is what this is all about. It's all about being the best self you can be. And it's why I take such a broad approach to it. And it is possible to say that one's studies can be too broad. I don't know that I completely agree with that. They can be too broad at any given moment, but I think the more you learn, the better off you're always going to be. And yes, it's wonderful to dive deeply into any of these. And I would argue that I have dived deeply into most of them. Um, and but with something like astrology or numerology, to focus as deeply as possible on these arts will take more than an entire lifetime. There is that much there. So it seems to me that it's wise to learn as much as you can. Now, Janet asked, what is the title of that little book? And I'm assuming you mean the book that I held up. And this is the Crystal Web User's Guide. And you can get this from Corellian Publishing. And it comes in this tiny little form along with two crystals for your use. And you can use it to create an access point to the crystal web. And it comes complete with crystals to use to do that. One to actually create the access point with, and one to carry with you. And it's all about how to create the crystal web access point. This one is laying here on my desk because it was a scrub. And you can maybe see that these staples are out of place, and I'm perfectionistic enough that I care whether the staples are in the right place or not. Um, but yes, this is one of the many things that we supply. We've done a lot of work with the crystal web. We're certainly going to do more. Um, of the many things I've been involved in my life, I'd have to say the crystal web is one of the most significant. It is, without question, to the best of my knowledge, the largest psychic engine ever created. And it is endlessly fascinating, both in what you can do with it, in concert with it, and just in itself. And it was created beginning on August 8th, 1988, by Ed the Pagan. but it also has a life of its own. It has a spirit of its own, as all things do, and it is a fascinating energy. And of course, if you watch this program, you've seen me work with it many times. You've seen me talk about it. You've seen Stand the Pagan work with it on numerous occasions, and many other people. It is a wonderful thing to work with, and this little book will help you set up a crystal access point if you don't already have one, um, as one of a variety of places you can find that information. It's interesting looking back over the last year. Since I retired as first priest of the Corellian tradition, which means that I'm now first priest retired in office, or first priest emeritus, still one of the first priesthood, but no longer dealing with any of the daily duties. I've been writing at a frenetic pace, certainly faster than most any other time in my life. We've come out with several books during this period, again, much faster than I ever would have done um, while I was still in office. And after we have the book of numerology out, the next one is the book of energy, which is going to be all about energetic workings. And there's still more in the future. I'm also hoping to get back to my puppetry once we get Gaia Thrift up and going. And you may remember that a little over a year ago, I was working on puppets, something I've been doing for a number of years, with the intention of doing a stop motion version of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. And this is still on my list of things to do. Um, we'll see if I can find time for it now. But I love working with puppets. And, I'd have to say that that's been true my whole life. I can remember a time when Lady Crystal and I were making art dolls together. Um, and in particular, we did one of Queen Alexandra of the United Kingdom that I will always remember as being particularly beautiful. But I've always been very big on miniatures, making miniature things. I remember being a child, and there was a book on this subject, just for amusement. And I remember reading all the different ways they were making the miniatures, I guess in the 1940s is when the book came out, and just being fascinated by it. And I still am. And I follow lots of miniaturists online, and I enjoy when I have the time to do that. I there was a point where I was working on them, and it was suggested that my studio was like walking into a mad scientist laboratory where he was making little people, and that's kind of what it was like. Um, but it's a form of art like any other, and art has always been probably my greatest love, other than spirituality and history. I've had many loves in that sense. I started doing art, I think, at the age of 3, at least in a serious way, because my father saw me doodling as a child, and started teaching me how to draw. My father was trained as a commercial artist. He did not make his career there, but he was trained there. And he still had all of his instructional materials from back in the day. So I grew up with that material to work with. And I wish I had that full series of books now. It was quite fascinating to see how commercial artists were then trained. When I eventually got into college, it was still a thing, and there were a great many secrets to that trade based on the technology of that time. Most of them, like working with four-color printing, is no longer relevant. Some of it is still relevant, and in the many times that I've done magazines that we actually printed out and distributed in real time, I found my training as a commercial artist extremely valuable, because I knew how to do certain things that other people of more recent vintage did not remember how to do. Being a graphic artist is a very different thing from being a commercial artist because it deals with very different technology. And understanding that technology is very important. And speaking of Ed the Pagan, he says, "Hey, Don. Hey, Ed. It's good to see you." Um, I talk a lot about technology. I focus a lot on technology. And one of the reasons is it's been so important during my lifetime, particularly in those places where I have put my emphasis in life, in art, in media, in video. What we're doing right now, and I've said this before, in the late 1980s, I was working with Donna Lyon-Rose to create a movie based on her writings. For various reasons, this was never finished, but it was a lot of fun trying to put it together. And I was working at that time with old-fashioned videotapes, and and one of the things that I really wanted was green screen technology. But at that time, it would have cost ten to $20,000 to do that because I looked into it. Today, I'm sitting in front of a green screen while we talk, and I do it every day and have for years now. It's built into modern systems, and the cost of doing this has come down so far, it's amazing. Now, Vivian in the chat room says, are there a few pages or an intro page that could be previewed? Do you mean of the Book of Astrology? That will be up soon. Or I mean, the Book of Numerology. The Book of Astrology, I believe there probably are already intros that are up. We've certainly talked about them yesterday on the program. If you go back and watch yesterday's program, we did look at some of the material on the program. But I'm waiting for our team to get more up as we go. But you'll be hearing more about it, and we'll be showing you more from it definitely in the next week or so. It is still in the polishing stage. Um, there are things that may work their way in that aren't in yet. There are things that may be included now that may not fully come to pass. And if you remember when we were talking about Reverend Don's Book of Astrology, that happened with a few things too. Um, when you put something together, there are always last minute changes. One of the things I really enjoyed doing with Reverend Don's Book of Astrology was including my own astrological chart. Um, I didn't, I wasn't so sure I was going to enjoy that, but in the end, I did. And in Reverend Don's Book of Numerology, we're also going to include my numerology as the example that you can use to see how this is done, how you apply all of the knowledge from the rest of the book. And that will be fascinating. The thing with numerology, so there are many different branches, many different ways of doing it. We're going to talk about some of those in the book. But in the end, I will speak to primarily the way that I do it. And as I've said before, I use a kind of Pythagorean numerology, um, which within that I come from a particular school. And Ed the Pagan says, Dagonet Doer, PPD founder, Pagan Pride Day founder, has passed into spirit. I saw that earlier today. I'm very sorry to hear that. And um, of course, we say, hail the traveler. Dagonet, at one time, he was one of our witch school mentors. Lovely person. And someone a person is proud to have known. And I was rather sad when I heard during lustration that he was very ill. Um, but I guess that he is now passed. And it's very interesting. It's very interesting having come so close to passing myself last year, to see other people, some of them younger than myself, um, having their time to enter into spirit. And it's very interesting to come face to face with that. And they talk about how during near-death experiences, you are sometimes told, no, it's not your time to stay here. You have more to do. And I was told, you have more to do. And if you pay attention, you'll see me doing it. I have more to do with teaching, with writing, with artwork, and of course with the community as a whole. And I'm looking forward to many great things in the future, a different future than my past. And as first priest and chancellor of the Corellian tradition, It was a wonderful role to be in for so many years, but it was also a very specific role, a very, in some ways, a very narrow role. And now that the active duties of the first priesthood have passed on to younger hands, um, I'm looking forward to many of the things the future now offers me, and to watching them continue to grow and to expand, both as individuals and as the tradition. Um, and Vivian says both books. I'll check yesterday's video. Thanks. Thank you, Vivian. Um, it's it's very interesting to consider. Another thing I wanted to mention today, as you know, on my Patreon, once a month I do a seminar. And I believe last month we didn't actually have one, but normally we do. And this month our seminar is going to be on Sunday. And if you're a member of my Patreon at the seminar level, it is there for you. If you're not a member of the Patreon, you can also get a ticket for $25 at Corellian Publishing. And this seminar is going to be on the subject of the shadow and shadow work. And of all the things I've been asked over the years, no one has asked about anything more than shadow work, possibly because I refer to it so often. Working with the shadow, in my opinion, is one of the great benefits of being on a spiritual path. And in the seminar, we'll talk about what it is and how we work with it to heal and integrate it back into our full selves. And I think that will be fascinating. If you're interested, you can find it at CorellianPublishing.com. Generally speaking, I'm looking to expand the things that I do in Patreon, but I do a number of things, including my weekly chat on Monday nights and my seminar and uh, various other things that may happen. But I'm looking to develop it further as we go forward, and probably we'll be talking about some of the things that I'm doing just in my daily life more than I have been previously. Partly because I expect to be doing more as we open up Gaia Thrift. And if you follow my Facebook page, you will have seen the tutelary spirit of Gaia Thrift, the alicorn. And the alicorn is going to be part of the logo for Gaia Thrift. And the alicorn, I think the alicorn is totally adorable. And you'll see more of the alicorn as we go forward. And the alicorn is also an interesting statement about spirit. Because, I've talked before about how people's reaction to spirit, their interrelation to spirit, the way they interact with spirit, is partly developed by their own attitudes. Working with my spirit guides, they're very patient, very humorous once I learn to let them be, very positive always. And Janet in the chat room, hello, Janet, says, the alicorn is a traveler. LOL. Yes, the alicorn is. The alicorn is a very expansive character. My late wife had very severe spirit guides. They were very harsh on her, very rigid with her. And at the time I asked myself, what is the difference in these things? Why do I have such easygoing guides and she has such harsh ones? And the answer I got, and what I've ever believed thereafter, was that she required them to be harsh. She was the one setting the tone, and they dealt with her. They met her where they found her. They came to her as she required them to do so, and came to me as I required them to do so. Because I'll tell you, if my spirit guides had been harsh, I wouldn't have worked with them in the same way. It's not part of my character to do that. And I think that the alicorn, who again is just adorable. I mean, she is cute and cuddly and childlike, and a powerful spiritual entity at the same time. But why wouldn't a powerful spiritual entity show itself that way? One of my favorite things to mention is the goddess Kali from India. And so many people in the West think of Kali as being this dark, harsh goddess, um, and that being her only form. But in India, she is widely accessed in the form of a little girl of, quote, infinite sweetness, end quote, which is how she comes to many of her devotees. Um, and again, it's a matter of what is necessary and finding the person where they are. There is a wonderful, um, and Janet says, Kali is a beautiful spirit. She is, absolutely. And extraordinarily kind and generous to her devotees. And not everyone in the West understands that. There's a wonderful film out of India, and I'm afraid I don't know the name, but it's about a married couple who are threatened by, I believe, by gangsters and violence. And at the climactic moment, the wife invokes the goddess Kali, who appears to her as this little girl and tells her, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. And then she becomes the great avenging goddess and proceeds to hunt down the bad people who are threatening her devotees. But she does not appear in that form to them. And when justice has prevailed, she returns to her form as a little girl and goes back to the couple to tell them that they are now safe. Um, which I just found an absolutely beautiful depiction. And if you have the chance to watch Indian cinema, particularly religious subjects, I think you will find you'll find things you don't find in Western books on the subject, and it's highly rewarding. And of course, if you're like me and you love international cinema in the first place, and you love insights into many different cultures, it's rewarding just for that reason as well. But spiritually, they can be, in their way, quite instructive. And with that, I see that we've come to the end of our half hour. Again, if you're interested in any of the books and products I've mentioned, you can find them at CorellianPublishing.com. And if you are interested in my Patreon, you can find that at RevDonLewis.com. If you're interested in a reading, which I haven't mentioned for a while, but you can still get readings with me, and you can book one of those through CorellianPublishing.com as well. Speaking of readings, tonight will be Tarot Thursday on Divination TV, and I hope that you'll join Reverend Mary Hawk and Reverend Brian Ellicott for Tarot Thursday. It will be a blast. And with that, I want to say that I love spending this time with you. I'll be back tomorrow with a weekly roundup of stories, and I will look forward to seeing you then. Now let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives. And we thank you for the gifts of divination and psychic ability, and for the messages you send to us that are so helpful in our lives. We thank you also for all the things that you do to help us to understand and cope with the nature of mortality and incarnation. And as we see the people around us ultimately making their transition back to spirit, let us remember that we too, in time, go back to spirit, and that this is a source of joy, not of sadness. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love. And knowing you are always with us out of respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and